guys, thank you so much for joining Emma and I today in our coffee date that we're about to have in celebration of my book that's coming out. Emma, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Oh my goodness, I could not be more happy to celebrate you and celebrate this book.
It was, I have to tell you, you know how I am with things. I'm like, oh, like I'll just do it. It'll be fine. It's not going to take that long. My literary agent was like, it's going to take like 2 years. And I was like, 2 years. I was like, if nothing takes 2 years, that's crazy. 2.5 years later, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really such a labor of love.
I was just going to use those exact words. I feel like for you, it actually has been a labor of love. I feel like you have been working on this pretty much ever since I've known you. And it's been like a continuous daily, weekly endeavor. It's like giving birth. That's how I equate it.
I mean, seriously, with triplets that are like consecutive. Crazy.
Hopefully less damaging than that.
hopefully. Let's see how the next 4 weeks roll out.
It's gonna be sad.
I wanted to talk to you specifically about, some of the anxiety that I had about writing this book is because I felt like as a Black female founder, it's been very important for me to present as buttoned up as possible, because I know that the expectation is that I'm going to make a mistake, or I'm not going to be able to deliver in the same way as people who, are white men, for example. And so I think for me, getting to a point where I actually feel comfortable, fully owning my past, being a dropout and coming from a very humble environment and all of that jazz. I don't know, it was really hard because I feel like even, especially in fashion, it kind of comes across as being extra judgmental. And I'm wondering, if any of that resonates with you, if you felt some of that pressure, as a founder, especially early on.
You know what? I can totally relate in such a profound way. It's quite unbelievable. I think that I've spent so much of my career apologizing for myself, apologizing for lack of a formal education, apologizing for, I guess not the usual start, not the usual path. And in a way, when I think about, where I've been successful, where that success has kind of been derived from, it's all of that untraditional stuff that's actually made me. And it's the stuff that's actually made not just a difference in my business, but a difference in my approach that's then made me successful. And I do think about, what can be your superpower, and especially for Black women, really, trying to shed that idea of having a non-traditional path, doing things in a different way. And I think that we need to kind of almost turn it on its head and think about those things as being a superpower, as being the reason that you're able to see things differently, approach things differently, have a different, energy that comes back to you. And so I think we've got a responsibility to just turn that notion entirely on its head. And, when I think about you, Aurora, your path has been really untraditional. It's really not, it really has. But I just think that that's so much a part of what makes you special and what makes your approach really unique. But it's definitely hard to get past that point or get to that point where you think of it that way. And at 40 years old, I don't think I've been thinking like that for that long. I feel like the last 5 years is when I've really started to see that more clearly. And there's definitely been an element of imposter syndrome or something akin to that has crept up and still creeps up in so many different ways.
I literally remember I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe after I won the fashion fund or something like that. I remember having this thing go off in my head being oh my God, I hope Anna Wintour doesn't find out that I went to jail for street racing. You know what I mean? Just the most embarrassing things ever that I just
take it back. I still hope she doesn't.
You know what I mean? You're just 100%. Oh my God, it's so cringe. Yeah. It's so cringe.
But ain't that
Um,
like, that's the real truth, and that's like the whole of you. And there's so many parts of that past that are additive to who you are and what you do now. I also think that when it comes to hiring, and I think both you and I are such champions of hiring, Black women in our organizations, I look at all of that as, okay, I'm not going to get the traditional path that I might think I am, but I think it's additive, and I think that we need that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like even when I think about, what you've done with Good American and what I've done with Brother Bellies, it's really just about championing what we know, right?
100%. And the thing is, you can only do what you know. I always get that same question of like, wow, it's so impressive when we look at your organization, you look at the board, you look at the management. It's like, I didn't set out to do any of that. That is what I know. That's my experience. That's my network. That's the whole thing. And so I think it's really interesting. Oh, Aurora, 1 second. I'm glad this is going to be edited because I've lost you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Am I back?
you're back. It's so
Okay.
strange. I just got like a notification that took over my whole screen. Sorry.
Okay.
Where were we? No, I think that, when we think about the type of people that we're bringing into our organization, it's important to think that that non-traditional path has a huge part of like, getting us to where we need to be. And it's interesting to me that not so many people are as open. Like you would think at this point, like having so many success stories that are a lot, coming from different backgrounds, less traditional, that we'd be more open to that. But even I think about in my own hiring practices at Good American, there's often candidates are presented to me, and the rhetoric is something that I think, God, I wouldn't be able to get that job myself. And so you constantly kind of have to check those assumptions at the door and make sure, especially as an organization scales, like, are you still being true to how you got here? And that's something that as things get bigger and you're not the one in charge of the hiring, I really have to think about that pretty constantly.
Well, there's this whole data set, which I can't even remember off the top of my head right now, but the idea behind it is like they were putting this like job description out, and they were asking men like, okay, like, would you apply for this job, right? And with all of the prerequisites, it's like 80% of the men, even if they didn't like meet the qualifications, were still going to apply for the job. But with women, it was like only 5% were, because they were like, oh, like, I'm actually not totally proficient in Chat GPT 4 yet, so I'm just not even going to apply. You know what I mean? But guys are like, oh yeah, I'm applying.
100%.
Like
Yeah.
basically figure all of this out.
But that is my everyday reality, right? And I think that, and you and I have spoken about this, a little bit. What's happening in the culture right now is really separating men and women. And I think that, if you think about social media, TikTok really specifically, how that targets women, what it says to women versus what it says to men, it's really creating this huge void in the workforce, right? Women see, this like insane beauty ideal. There is like a complete obsession with what I feel like is like this entitlement culture around the workplace at the moment. And it is 100% at the detriment of women over men right now, because meanwhile, the guys are watching, sports and skateboard tricks, and the women are being given this completely different point of view that is actually holding us back in the workplace a little bit. And so I think about that all of the time. And I think that, some of that insecurity that you're talking about, how women present themselves over men in business, comes from this like social media culture that we're in right now. We've got a lot of work to do to try to combat that.
Yeah, totally. Someone was interviewing me yesterday asking about like how I maintain work-life balance and stuff. Like that's the big question always, right?
And always,
And
just for the
they,
girls.
yeah, right, totally. And they just like really want me to talk about matcha and meditation. And I'm just sort of like, oh, I'm definitely like not really.
No.
And by the way, like that's okay, because I'm also doing what I love, and I'm doing something that's impactful, and it's not going to be forever, but right now, like this is my leg of the relay, and I took it from someone else and I'm going to pass it on soon.
100%. And I do think that, you know, I speak about it all the time. There's a trade-off, right? And as for a certain period in your life, certain things take precedent, but it isn't without sacrifice. And I think you and I think about this all the time, because you can only be, you know, and spread yourself so thin and give your energy to so many things. But when the opportunity arises and you have to stand to the occasion, it's really important that you do that. Now, can you do that while still having so-called balance everywhere else in your life, and making sure that you meet every person on appointment, and you're, you know, doing your meditation and doing your self-care practices? Like, for me, absolutely not. It's a trade-off every day. I think as long as you're able to make that choice for yourself and be mindful about it. But this kind of idea that we're obsessed with, that is, you know, this balance, I don't know, like who has it, you know, please explain to me how it goes, because that's just not the reality of my life. And I think that we'd all do ourselves a huge favor if we just actually stop talking about balance and start talking about like our passion, what we're able to do,
Right.
and how we use our time. And sometimes that means you're going to experience, you know, a lot all at once, but that's just what it is. That's the reality of actually moving the needle. Right.
Right. It's about fulfillment too, right? Like, because that's the other thing that's so fascinating to me. I'll have conversations with people, and I'll tell them like, oh yeah, like I'm super, and listen, like a lot of people are very judgy about it too, right? Like, and I'll be like, yeah, like not, you know, I'm working like 18, 19 hours a day right now, like blah, 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 blah. And they're a little bit critical. And I'm like, yeah, but like I launched a nonprofit, and like we're all working together, and are, you know, it's one of the fastest growing nonprofits in America. Like that doesn't happen without like a ton of blood, sweat, and tears from like every single person that's involved. And by the way, like the impact is so real and so gigantic. Like how like how insane would it be if I was just like clocking out, see you later?
Totally. There is no taking your foot off the pedal, right? The 15% pledge is a startup like anything else. Like, you know,
Right.
it's non-profit, but we have to think about this like a business. We have to think about this in terms of impact level. And there is no moment where we can take a breath and take a pause, because at the end of the day, we have to use the momentum. And we already know that momentum around this type of subject, you know, it goes up and down with the news cycle. And so you have to take the moment. And I feel like that's exactly the same in business, right? You have a specific moment in time. Sometimes the wind's in your back, sometimes it's in your face, but you really have to, you've got to move. And there is no, there is no kind of like lean back moment. It just doesn't happen like that.
How did you, I talk a lot in my book about, I basically like stumbled into everything sort of, right? Like a lot of it was
Yeah.
inadvertent, and, you know, not to like discredit the work that I've done or the planning or the, all of that. Right. But even with Brother Bellies, it was like, I kind of inadvertently launched it at a flea market, and with 15% pledge, it was an Instagram post. And then I had to actually take the initiative and step into what that then meant to execute on the idea or the proposition. Right. And I think because it was non-intentional, or at least if there was intent, it was subconscious, it made it easier for me because it felt less deliberate. So I didn't have to like convince myself to like jump off the cliff into launching this new thing. I was just sort of like, guys, I'm falling. I think I launched something. Like, is anyone down there to catch me kind of vibe? And I feel like one of the things that I admire about you is there is a lot of intention behind some of what you're doing. So my question is this, because I think if I had have set out to be like, I'm going to launch a fashion business, I just never would have actually probably launched it. Same with a nonprofit. It's like, I would have been like, what, how, where, like, and so I feel like there's been more intention with what you've done. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you gain that? How did you gain that confidence when you were launching your first business, and even still now? Do you have imposter syndrome? It's such a strange phrase, but
It's such a strange phrase, isn't it? And it's something that comes up all the time. You know, I think that so much of it comes from my upbringing, and I really look at that. Hello.
I'm really admiring the decor over here.
Second. Hello. Hi. You can. You actually need to ask her to wait for 10 minutes, please, and I'm going to get Derek to come down. Thank you. Sorry, Aurora, they were expecting me to be done now, but let me just tell, I think that we need a second. I'm just going to tell Derek. Derek. Tell them not to call my room. Recording. There we go. All right. So imposter syndrome. So, you know, it is, it's really interesting for me because when I think about how my businesses actually started, you know, the initial business that I had was, you know, based around entertainment and marketing. And I was someone that really wanted to be in fashion. It just so happened I saw an opportunity and I was able to really lean into that. But I do think that, you know, for me, so much of what I've done has come from this idea of the fact that, you know, I saw myself creating value for other people over and over again. And when you're a consultant, that's what you're doing, right? Your job is to take the brands that are paying for you and create really great things for them. And if I'm really honest, you know, with Good American, the whole idea of that brand wasn't necessarily about me wanting to start something in fashion, which had always been a passion of mine. It was more about it's time that I created some value for myself. And, you know, in creating a product, that for me was the first time I wasn't working for a client per se. It's the first time I said, this is going to be my one of these things that I'm doing. And I think that that was a really, you know, if I said that I didn't have imposter syndrome at that time, you know, if you're a person that's working for, you know, Dior and Calvin Klein and H&M, and suddenly you're like, I'm going to put myself in the product business with zero experience, there was a lot of imposter syndrome. But at the same time, I knew that there was value in my viewpoint. I had enough information, having been in the industry for 10 years, I was like, there's a whole, you know, segment of society that are left out of a conversation. There is an entire customer that's overlooked here. And I think I can see that in a unique way. And I think that as soon as you get, you know, like for me, it was like I had a, you know, a little bit of like, I'm sure so many consultants feel like this. I was like, I have created all of this value and I have nothing to show for it. Like, I'm renting a property right now. Meanwhile, everyone else is out here, you know, like buying mansions. And that's how I thought about it in my head. It's like very far-fetched and not at all true. But, you know, that was the feeling. And so sometimes I feel like, you know, that the intentionality behind what I have done has come from a place of actually feeling like, you know, let's draw a line in the sand now and start to create real value for yourself. And that's where it really all started for me. How can I do something that I believe is about, you know, me and my family and, you know, starting to create some type of value. But I got over the imposter syndrome quickly, because I think what happens when you start to do things in, you know, with yourself in mind, when you start to think about customers in a less traditional way. And for me, starting this business particularly was so rewarding because, you know, the feedback that I got back really early on was amazing. It was like, there is a gap here and you are speaking to a customer that feels underrepresented, seen, underserviced. And so it was very, very quickly reassuring. But I think that generally for women in business, you know, that we have a different, you know, there's an approach that, or not an approach, that's the wrong way to think about it. There is a feeling that oftentimes there is somebody better to do everything than you. And I think that what my experience has taught me is that is just not the truth, right? It's like, actually, my opinion, my point of view, my experience or lack thereof is all really valid. And actually, we need more of that in the world. And I think that, you know, when you and I speak and I look at all of the businesses that we surrounded ourselves with, I'm seeing that over and over again. You know, it's just like palpable and it's spilling out from everywhere. And I'm so excited about the work we do at the Pledge, not just because it's like a source of just immense pride that in this short amount of time, so much change is actually happening, but you're actually starting to see like real success. You know, you're starting to see these businesses bloom and blossom, and for a reason. And I kind of love that, you know, that is all coming from the point of view of just this, like, you know, it's not like they weren't there before. They've all been there. It's just about where attention goes, right? And that for me is just kind of amazing. It's just amazing.
Right. It's that whole quote about like talent and intelligence being distributed equally, but opportunity and access not to be.
Which is what you say so beautifully. And I think that, you know, when you say opportunity and access, like, that is it. Right. It's just that. And there are so many examples of that every day. You know, I obviously have done a couple of seasons of Shark Tank. And in that second season, they said, you know, there's a 600% uptick in Black owned businesses actually even applying for the show. But the beauty of it was every single shark on that panel invested in Black owned businesses, because once given the opportunity, once given the platform, a good idea is a good idea. Right. And that
Totally.
is. And again, we talk about it all the time. Black businesses aren't just for Black people. So when a good idea is given the right platform and the right finance and the right spotlight, you know, game over. It deserves just as much attention as anything else.
Totally. And I mean, I think what's so awesome too, since launching the pledge, is we're actually able to see that like a lot of these Black owned businesses are outperforming, right? And I mean, it's totally insane when you look at someone like a Danessa Myricks, right? Who's builds this crazy business with literally nothing. Like she was like, oh, here's nothing. I just made everything. And you're like, wait a minute, what?
100%. 100%. But that is, you know, and again, like, to speak to that level of resourcefulness and, you know, how do you get there? Because again, so many people start their businesses with millions of dollars of funds and don't have that level of success. But that resourcefulness, like, that's unique. That is something that, you know, you can't put a price. I mean, you literally can't put a price on.
Well, and the thing is that Black people in America have had to do that since the very beginning, right? And it's like ingrained in Black people that they have to make something out of nothing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Right. And so it's just so fascinating when you watch some of these women actually get opportunity and access for the first time, take the ball and freaking run with it.
Run with it and see how much they can make when they are given something, right? Which
totally.
Is so just so extraordinary. But I think about it with you now, because, you know, this book is such a departure from, in so many ways, everything else that you've done around business and the nonprofit. Like, when you look at this, like, did you have a specific, like, you know, I always think that I kind of like set these intentions and I go, like, I really want this to be this. Like, do you have a specific intention with the book? Like, is there something that you're like, I want to tell my story, or like, what would you hope and wish to come out of it?
Well, you know, did I ever tell you this, the moment when I realized that I needed to do it?
No.
So I was on the phone with Jill, who works for me, she's a publicist, and she had just had like a bunch of lunches with people and was explaining to a few editors about the pledge and Brother Bellies and all that jazz. And I was like, she was talking to me and I was just kind of like, And I was like, but Jill, at the end of the lunch, after you've talked to these editors for an hour, 2 hours, and, you know, you're paying the check or whatever, and then they lean into you and say, just tell me, what is that one question that they ask you about me that they actually really just want to know? And she was like, oh, it's always the same. And I was like, well, what is it? And she's like, they all just want to know who your parents are and what they do.
What?
I mean,
I was rich.
I was shook. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah, they just feel like you've done a really good job of like hiding your family. And I was like, wait, literally, what are you talking about? You know? And
that is so great. This is why you need an accent like me, Aurora, because then there is just no kidding. It's like, she's clearly from a trash place. It's like, it just like spills out of you. No way. Is that the assumption? Oh, well.
And I was like, wow, like, I was like, there's the world like can't believe that a Black woman could like go out and do this stuff without having a silver spoon in their mouth to some degree. And then I was also like, oh shit, I've been complicit in this.
Yeah,
because I've spent so much time like keeping straight my like costume of identity,
Mhm.
right? And not allowing like the cracks to show,
Mhm.
that I've just continued to perpetuate this narrative of like, oh, I must be from some other kind of
Yeah, like
experience.
somehow if you don't have like a rags to riches story ready to spew, that immediately means the direct opposite. I get that. I understand why that would, you know, I guess why telling your story and explaining exactly where you come from becomes really important. But I also think about it from this perspective of like, what does it mean for other people to know the full story, right? And
Exactly.
you know, I was talking to my sisters, you know, about your book last week because I
I
finished
love
it.
it. There's so much. I love them.
They're so great. I actually gave, because I got an extra book at the launch the other week, and I gave one to Rochelle.
Great.
You know, like we were talking about it, and Rachel said to me, so many people need this. So many people need to read this story and to understand it's possible. And, you know, where do you go for it? Where do you go for a book like that? And I thought to myself, yeah, like that's the reason. When you can speak to like a 30-year-old woman and she can pick that up and say, oh my goodness, this is possible for me. This is something that is attainable for me. I can see a piece of myself in her. Like we need those stories, and seeing and reading is believing. And I think that's the, like, for me, that's the really important part about this. And, you know, we talk about it was like representation matters, of course, but it's like, we need these stories. We need to know how hard it's been for you. We need to understand the roadblocks and the emotion and everything that comes with it, because otherwise, and people can be forgiven for thinking, you know, Aurora, fabulous outfit, CFTA, blah, 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 you know what I mean? And seemingly all is gold. I think that it's so important to see and listen to the story and to discuss it, right? Because there's so much in that book that is to be really discussed and spoken about. And there's such a honesty and what is the word? You know, there's such it's not just honesty, it's when you bear, you know, when you've really vulnerability, that's what I'm talking about. You've just bared your soul. And I think there's such honesty and vulnerability in the story that is the bit that I love about it. You know, it's like we all see a certain side of you. And I think it's really, you do a huge service to Black women by just being really raw, really honest, really vulnerable.
Thank you. I just felt like there was no win for any of us to continue perpetuating this narrative that like you have to be a certain way in order to have this outcome happen. And I like, I'm still cringing, Emma. Like every time I read like a weird review or something, and they're like, yeah, like this girl who was this kid that was abused, like just like the way in which people just like talk about my
Build your narrative down, right?
totally. I'm like, oh my God, right? Like that's so painful and scary. And even just little things that I mention in the book that now people are like really latching on to, that they're like, wait, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. I'm like, I didn't even think that that was going to register with
And
someone.
you can never know which bits are going to register. But for me, this becomes like, again, it's like the takeout of this book is about a woman on a mission with a journey and what it takes to get there. And that is an important story. That is not, you know, forgive me for saying it's not about you then, right? Then it becomes about all of
Right.
us, and it becomes
Right.
about everyone else that you're impacting and everyone else that you're inspiring and everyone else that frankly you're just like, you know, telling the truth of your story. And that is so needed. It's just so needed. And I think it's like it's brave, but also it's you know, Aurora, it's so funny because even, you know, I haven't known you for that long, and we've become close because we have to like work together every day. But, you know, in the discovery, in reading that book, you know, there's so many sides of you, and there's so many sides of us, of women, and there's so much that we hide and don't want to show the world. But there's so much commonality in that, right? There's so much that I was like, really? Her too? Like that's me. And like, we've never spoken about that. And that's the beautiful thing about this, that we get to see a different side of you, and there's so much humanness in that, right? I feel like people are going to stop you walking down the street and just be so like grateful. That's what I think is going.
That's so sweet. Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate that. I do really feel like this is in so many ways a story about all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we all have the oppressors that I've had. They may come in a different shape or different form. We've all had fucking fails at work sometimes, like misplaced trust, like questions about system, like all of that. And we're just working through it, right? We're just trying to figure it out. And I think it's so fascinating that as women, like the perseverance is crazy.
Crazy perseverance. And you were very elegant in the way that you chose to deal with so many things. I would have been less elegant.
Oh my God, I don't know that that's true. Okay, there's a question that people ask, because we asked people to submit questions. And the question that we got many, many times was, how do you know where to find the right investor and when they are the right one?
You know, I get that question all the time, and I understand why people ask that, because seemingly there is, you know, there's actually, funnily enough, there's a lot of money around, right? And I think that at a certain point, we have to be very discerning when we're taking money off of people. The first thing is, you know, is there a plan for that capital? And just understanding that most investors, 99.9% of them, would like to get their money back at some point. So I feel like you aligning expectations with an investor is the most important thing, but also understanding that cash is just one element of taking an investor. The other element is like, what kind of strategic value is that person or that firm, or, you know, whatever it is, what are they bringing to you? And so I would think long and hard, because there are so many different ways to the money that actually you really need to think about investment in a much more like holistic way. Who are the individuals? What is that firm bringing to you? What is the strategic value of that money? And making sure, and I can say this because I've taken the right investment, I've taken the wrong investment, taken it somewhere in the middle. But, you know, really ensuring that those people are aligned with what you are trying to do. And that isn't just to get to the next stage or the next, like, you know, round or the next finance level, but it's like, are you aligned in the journey and how you're going to get there? And so my advice is to spend a lot longer than you think searching for and aligning with potential investors, because that's often the mistake that people make. They see the cash, they're desperate for the cash, and I fully understand and appreciate that desperation, because I've been there myself in the past. But you really need to make sure that there's such alignment before you take money from anyone.
Right. I think like my book is a great case study also of like what happens when you take the absolute wrong cash, which I'm excited for everyone on this call to read, because it's horrifying, and hopefully they can like learn some of those.
One of my most horrifying stories, and in one of those times where I thought you dealt with something with elegance.
I mean, we changed
so mad.
the names have been changed. The names have been changed. I felt like that was the
Again,
most
elegance. See, personified.
Okay, and then I wondered, like, do you feel, and I'm sure the majority of the people who are watching us right now are bootstrapping their business, and I'm just wondering, like, do you feel like it's possible to just only have a bootstrapped business?
You know, it is, Aurora, but it's getting harder and harder. And I also think that, you know, certainly for me in the beginning, I'm like, who am I bootstrapping for? I don't know anyone with any money. You know, it's like such a great thing when people go, let's do a friends and family round. You're like, my friends and family are broke. What are we talking about here? So wonderful if you have that network and you're able to do that. And I definitely think it's, you know, it's possible to bootstrap something, but it's a privilege to be in that position to do it. And it's also, I think that it's uniquely something that, you know, being in a position where you are able to put that pressure on the people around you and deal with what that potentially brings is also a different set of struggles that as a, you know, a startup and like a business owner in the first thing, you may not choose to take that on. So again, I think wherever you raise finance from, you have to be very clear about the expectations of the people around you, and even harder when those people are, you know, related to you. But yeah, it's I think there's been plenty of people that have proved that you can bootstrap a business, and it depends on the aspirations and what you're trying to do and the growth. It's, you know, we're in such a unique business climate right now, right? Everything's changed with the advent of social and how ideas can be picked up and can be, like, you know, put out in a global way like they never could before. And so I think anything's possible for sure.
Yeah.
You think?
I think bootstrapping with just like friends and family money is, to your point, like a specifically challenging thing to do. I think that pressure, even though for me, like I also didn't have friends and family with money, but like the pressure of taking money from like my mom or something would be so overwhelming to me. I don't even know how, like, that would add a whole other layer to the business.
That's a whole other book.
Right, totally. But then I think like trying to just build a business with like no money from anyone, like, you know, it's so rare, but it's, you know, I mean, you see these case studies. I mean, even with like a Danessa Myricks, right? It's like, I don't know, it's pretty crazy. But I think for the reality for a lot of Black entrepreneurs is going to have to be that,
Yeah.
right? Like they're literally going to have to try to get to their first $1 million in sales, like with no help.
Yeah, it's just it's facts. 100%. And we see it over and over and over again, and it really is it really is, to me, just like a sad reality. And I think that what's happening right now, like we're definitely seeing a ton of progress. People are opening their eyes and realizing that ideas don't always come, or businesses don't always come from necessarily like where you would expect them from, but
Yeah.
it's slow progress, you know. And what we need is, you know, more education, more opportunity for those businesses that are able to get to 1 million, to 5 million, to 10 million, because the financial institutions, that entire world of, you know, capital, works in one way. And the way that it works is that things have to transact. Things have to get to a point where they can sell and be acquired, because that's the only way things are counted. Nobody's sitting there going, oh, let's look at all of these businesses that took investment. What counts is the businesses that transacted. And so again, it's like we're all focused like so much on how much opportunity there is and how we can get certain businesses financed, but we've actually got to make sure that these businesses are able to be successful, are able to transact, and able to go into that next stratosphere, because that is the only way we're going to see more and more cases of investment pouring into Black-owned businesses. And that's why the work that the Pledge does is so incredibly important, because it isn't about year 1, year 2, year 3. It's about year 10, 11, 12, and on and on and on. And, you know, I think that when we think about businesses right now, it's so like there's so much scaling involved in that initial, you know, when you're in a startup phase and you're trying to get something off the ground, and then things start to fly, right? And they
Yeah.
you know, a business almost takes on a life of its own. But we all know those years like 0 to 3, like that is hard. That is like, not everybody is made for that journey. But, you know, I think that we're starting to see like real success stories, and that gets unbelievably exciting for us, I think.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me.
No, listen, it's the best thing, one of the most rewarding things. And, you know, I think about, you know, we're right at the beginning of something like magical and amazing. I wonder what it would be like if we can do this, like revisit in like 10 years. Can you imagine?
So crazy. That's
How
what's so,
how
you know,
many books, how many businesses?
oh my gosh, wow. Woo. You know, you said something to me the other day. I don't remember why I was like so tired, I'm sure, like crying probably, but I remember you being like, you're like, yep, probably were.
You right?
I remember you really like almost like shaking me for a second with your eyes and being like, make sure that you're present for what's happening, because this moment is like so special and major and big, you know? And I also like want to say that to you because I'm so, so, so fucking proud of you and the way that you have been able to show up and inspire people and do this work and get it all done and be a mom and be a wife and be a friend and be a sister and a daughter and, you know, a chairwoman and like all these other things, you know, it's like, it's a lot and it's great and it's big. And I think we're both going to look back at this time and be really like, how?
But we'd
You
have
know,
done it.
we'll have done it.
We'll have done it. And that's the important thing. And the best thing about it is that, you know, we would have touched so many people, because that's the whole point of all of this work, right? It's not about you, it's not about me, it's about all of the impact and everybody that is going to be able to feel this work. And I'm always so grateful that I met you, and always so grateful that we get to do this stuff together. But, you know, it started with an Instagram post, right? It's like, you can never forget that. It started by being brave and being vulnerable and putting something out there and having such a level of self-belief in what you were saying and trying to do, that it changed like a whole bunch of people's lives, right? And that is the important thing, that when we are honest with ourselves and we're willing to like just go the extra mile and do what we believe in, like amazing things happen, not just for us, but for everybody. And so, you know, I have, and I continue to applaud you for that. And, you know, onwards, we have a lot of work to do.
So much work.
But
it's good. And it's a privilege. I really do. Yeah.
It's too true.
What's our favorite Billie Jean King quote? Pressure is
a privilege. We need that framed.
We do.
That's going up in the new pledge office, right?
Yeah.
That is
I heard that
mantra.
you were there.
I did, and I was like almost crying. I was like, thank you so much for giving us the space.
Yeah, that's
it's
so
amazing.
Cool. It was
the idea to put all of that, I just, you know, like that, it's like putting all of that energy in one room. Like, it cannot be, you know, it's just going to be so amazing. The idea that everyone's been working remote for this long, it was so funny. I came out of our board meeting the other day, our strategy meeting, and I was like, everyone's still remote. That's going to be a game changer. And I think that the speed in which we do things, and that is going to change, it's going to change everything.
I think so too. I'm really excited about it.
Right. I love you and leave you. I've got an hour.
Love you too. I'll see you so soon.
Thank you.
Bye, Em.
Later, love.